Our Bible word is Deuteronomy 28, verse 2. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. So if we look, or have an overall look at the book of Deuteronomy, it's, of course, forms part of the books of Moses, and the name Deuteronomy means second law, and it's claimed to be written by Moses, but actually as a book it was written long after the time of Moses. But the historical setting that it describes is that Moses and the Israelites were the second generation. After 40 years of trekking through the wilderness, they're now in the land of Moab, that's on the southeastern edge of the land of Canaan, and they were about to enter the promised land and conquer it. And here in Deuteronomy, it purports to record Moses' last words to the Israelites. And he's reminding them, remember what God has done for you, how he has delivered you from Egypt, how he's brought you here and is giving you this promised land, and also that you must obey his law. And if you obey, you will be blessed. But if you disobey, there will be curses, etc. And Deuteronomy consists of three large speeches or narratives that Moses gives to the Israelites. And the book of Deuteronomy is a covenant treaty. In other words, this is now Moses telling the Israelites, this is the agreement, the contractual agreement, so to speak, between you and God. God will do his bit. He's committed to being faithful to you, and now you are also obligated by this covenant agreement to be obedient to God. And the book of Deuteronomy also forms part of what is known as the Deuteronomistic movement. And its essential expression we find in the book of Deuteronomy itself, but it also consists of the book of Joshua, Judges, 1 and 2 Samuel, and also 1 and 2 Kings. And the Deuteronomistic movement is a collection of books that displays a distinctive theology. It focuses on worship of God alone, or Yahweh, the God of Israel. It focuses on worship must only be done in Jerusalem, not in other places outside of Jerusalem. And also this idea of if you are obedient, you will be blessed, and if you are disobedient, you will be cursed. So these are some of the main ideas that we find in this Deuteronomistic movement. Now, if we look at its origins, it probably originated from northern Israel. And if we need to understand this, we must look at the history of Israel itself, the land and people. As we know, there was the United Kingdom, and then later on, after the death of Solomon, there were the divided kingdom, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And then around 733 BC, and then later on 722 BC, these Assyrian rulers came. First Tiglath-Pileser, and then Shalmaneser I and Sargon II. They came and attacked the northern kingdom Israel, and eventually also took the 10 tribes away. So for all intents and purposes, the kingdom of Israel ceased to exist, and the 10 northern tribes disappeared. But it's at this time when this Deuteronomistic movement that originated here in northern Israel moved south to Judah. And this Deuteronomistic movement consisted of Israelite scribes. They had this particular theology. They moved down to Judah at this time when Assyria conquered the northern kingdom. And this was also at the time of Hezekiah, and they influenced the king Hezekiah, who's also described in the Bible as a good king in terms of loyalty and commitment to God. Now, if we move about 100 years forward to the time of King Josiah, and Josiah ruled from 640 BC to 609 BC. At this time, and also after him, the other kings that followed Josiah, there was Baal worship was rampant, together with Baal's wife, Asherah. Child sacrifices were made. There was the oppression of the poor. And of course, this was a time when Jeremiah arrived and he told them or warned them of this coming catastrophe, speaking specifically of the destruction of the temple and the exile that will be to follow. So this was the time of as the prophet Jeremiah. But Josiah, he attempted a reform in around 622 BC. And how did this come about? Because in his time, a book of the law was discovered in the temple. And we can read about this in 2 Kings 22, verse 8. And once this book was discovered, King Josiah, he called all the people together and he said, look at this and look how we are disobeying God. We must renew our covenant with God. And so based on this book of the law, which is probably like the core of the book of Deuteronomy, King Josiah with the people, they wanted to renew their covenant with God. And this is when Josiah attempted a reform. He destroyed all places of worship outside Jerusalem. Also within Jerusalem, he cleansed the temple because there was Baal worship and the worship of Baal's wife Asherah within the Jerusalem temple itself. So Josiah, he got rid of all these foreign elements from the temple and also focused on pilgrimage, come to Jerusalem, especially for the Passover, celebrate the Passover here in Jerusalem. So there was this genuine attempt by the King Josiah, based on this discovery, this book of the law, the core part of the book of Deuteronomy, where this covenant renewal as such happened. And we can read about that where this covenant is made between God and the people in 2 Kings 23, verses 1 to 3, there where Josiah calls all the people together. So if we look specifically at the book of Deuteronomy, it refers to this also this book of the law that was discovered at the time of King Josiah in the temple. It probably consisted of chapters 12 to 16, as well as chapter 26. And then at the time of Josiah, or King Josiah, when he brought the people together to make this covenant renewal with God, chapters 5 to 7 were added at the beginning, and chapters 27 to 28 were added later on. That's specifically where it speaks of this covenant being made and the blessings and curses that will follow. And although Josiah really attempted this reform and to rid Israel or the Jewish people from this foreign worship, it didn't last, it didn't hold, because the kings that followed after him, that's Jehoahaz, Joachim, and Joachim, and Zedekiah, these elements of Baal worship and child sacrifices, it surfaced again. And of course, Jeremiah warned them all, but eventually they were punished. And the destruction of the temple and the exile happened in 586 BC. So now the people went into exile. The temple was destroyed. And so now the book of Deuteronomy received its final shape. So chapters 1 to 4 and chapters 30 to 34 were added after the fall of Jerusalem during the exile. Especially if you go read the chapters 30 to 34, it speaks of the exile. It speaks of you will be dispersed, you will be scattered among the nations, but if you obey me, I will bring you back. So this is how we must understand the book of Deuteronomy. It's about covenant renewal. It's about God pledging fidelity to his people and people also being admonished, be obedient to God. If you obey, there will be blessings. If you disobey, there will be curses. And the core of Deuteronomy was discovered at the time of King Josiah. The book of the law, as it's called, was discovered in the temple. And at the time of Josiah, there was this covenant renewal where some extra material was added. Then finally, the first and last chapters were added at the time of exile, because now it's looking back and it's also asking, how did this happen? How did we go into exile? Why was our temple destroyed? So it also receives that perspective or that benefit of hindsight of why we are here in this mess. And so it's a book, it's this covenant treaty, this contract between God and his people. Obey God. If you don't, you will be punished. These curses will come upon you. Now, our Bible word comes from the time when King Josiah attempted this reform after this book of the law was discovered in the temple. Specifically, that portion of chapters 27 to 28, where this covenant agreement is made or ratified. And it also comes from the second talk or speech of Moses, and that's from chapters 4 verses 44 to 28 verses 68. So the second address concerns the stipulations of the covenant treaty and its ratification. And chapter 28 specifically lists blessings and curses. The blessings is covered in verses 1 to 14, and the curses are covered in verses 15 to 68. So if you read our Bible word again, it says, "And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God." So this is now part of the covenant agreement, this contract. If you obey, these are all the good things that will happen to you. And the things that is mentioned, we'll just focus here on verses 3 to 6 for now, is that blessing will come over the city and country, blessing will come upon their children, their crops, their livestock, their daily sustenance. That's what that baskets and kneading bowl refers to. It's about the storing and preparation of food. And also blessings will come upon them performing their daily tasks or labor. Now these blessings are also balanced by curses in verses 16 to 19 for those who want to read it, where things are listed, what will happen to city and country and children, etc., if you do not obey God's commandments. So, yeah, God lists blessings because it carries on in terms of they'll become most eminent amongst all the nations. You will the ones who will lend money to others. You will have prestige, you will have standing, you'll have lots of food, things will go well with you. And then the rest of chapter 28, it's quite horrible. If you read all those curses that are listed there, that will come upon them if they do not obey the covenant. So, chapter 28, blessings if you obey. It lists all those blessings, that things, natural life will go well, in terms of your children, life in general, etc., crops. I mean, speaking of agriculture and the family, that was important elements of life at this time. It will be blessed and there will be abundance. And the rest of chapter 28 speaks of all these terrible curses that will come upon people if they're disobedient.